First story by Johnathan Harker. I've always thought there was something peculiar about my grandmother's house in the countryside. It was an old Victorian-style home, nestled in the rural outskirts of Virginia. I remember it was the summer of 2009 when my parents decided I should spend a week there. I was just 15, a city kid, unaccustomed to the eerie quiet of the countryside. The house itself had a charm, with its creaky floorboards and antique furniture. But as night fell, that charm turned into something more sinister. The first night, I was jolted awake by the sound of footsteps outside my room. Thinking it was my grandmother, I called out, but there was no response, just the sound of footsteps fading into the distance. Each day, I explored the surrounding woods, but as I ventured further, I stumbled upon an old, abandoned well. It was partly covered in overgrowth, but what struck me was the cold, ominous air around it. I felt watched, but seeing nobody, I shrugged it off as rural paranoia. Back at the house, strange things kept happening. Doors would slam shut, and I'd find items moved from where I left them. One evening, while in the attic, I found an old diary belonging to my grandmother's sister who had vanished years ago. The entries were disturbing, filled with tales of strange figures wandering the property and an unnerving obsession with the old well. That night, the footsteps returned, louder and more frantic. I mustered the courage to open the door, but the hallway was empty. As I turned back, I saw a shadow dart across the room's corner. Fear gripped me. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. The next day, I confronted my grandmother. Her face turned pale when I mentioned the diary and the well. With a trembling voice, she revealed the truth. Her sister had been drawn to the well, claiming it spoke to her, whispering dark secrets. One day, she simply disappeared, and my grandmother believed whatever resided in that well took her. I couldn't sleep after that. On my last night, the air felt heavier, the silence more oppressive. Suddenly, a loud thump echoed from downstairs. Heart pounding, I went to investigate. As I reached the bottom step, I saw the front door swing open, revealing the pitch-black night. I froze, unable to move, as a chilling breeze swept through the house. Then, from the darkness, I heard a faint whisper calling my name. It was coming from the direction of the well. I didn't dare move. After what felt like an eternity, the door slammed shut and the whisper stopped. I left the next morning, vowing never to return. I still don't know what was in that house or by that well, but I'm certain something was there. Something unexplainable and terrifying. That first tale was quite the spine chiller, but hold on tight, because this next story will take the terror up a notch. Second story by Emily Stone. My name is Emily Stone, and I never believed in the supernatural until my experience on a farm in rural Iowa in the fall of 2015. I had taken a sabbatical from my teaching job in Chicago to find peace in the countryside. The farm I rented was picturesque, with sprawling fields and an old rustic barn. It seemed like the perfect escape. But the tranquility was short-lived. From the first night, I felt uneasy. The house, dating back to the early 1900s, had a peculiar layout and an air of being stuck in time. The creaking of the wooden floors at night was unnerving, and cold drafts seemed to come from nowhere. One morning I found several of my belongings misplaced. I thought little of it, attributing it to my forgetfulness. However, things escalated quickly. I started hearing whispers in the dead of night, always too faint to make out words, but clear enough to know they were human voices. Then came the sightings. One evening, while walking near the barn, I saw a figure standing in the upper window. It was a woman dressed in what looked like early 20th century clothing, staring blankly out the window. I blinked and she was gone. This shook me, but I convinced myself it was a trick of the light. A few days later, I discovered an old locked room in the barn. Curiosity got the better of me, and I managed to break the lock. Inside, I found what appeared to be remnants of a makeshift living area: an old bed, a broken lamp, and faded photographs of a woman, the same I saw in the window. That night, the whispers grew louder, more insistent. I couldn't sleep. I decided to investigate the history of the farm and found out about a tragic past. In the early 1900s, a young woman lived here with her oppressive family. She fell in love with a local boy, but her family forbade their union. One night, she vanished, and locals believed her family locked her away in the barn where she eventually died. Knowing this, the farm felt different. The whispers seemed to carry a message, a plea. I started seeing the woman more frequently, always in the shadows, always with a look of profound sadness. The climax came one stormy night. The power went out and the house was plunged into darkness. I heard footsteps upstairs, and then a woman's voice, clear as day, calling out a name. It wasn't mine. Terrified, I locked myself in the bedroom, but the footsteps grew louder until they stopped right outside my door. As quickly as it started, it stopped. The next morning, I packed my bags and left. I couldn't shake the feeling that the woman's spirit was trapped there, reliving her tragic past. The farm's beauty had become a facade for a haunting tale of lost love and eternal sorrow. Now, if you thought that was chilling, just wait until you hear the next story. It's a walk in the countryside like no other, filled with an unsettling twist. Third story by Michael Roberts. I've always found solace in walking my dog, Max, especially after moving to a small village in the English countryside in the summer of 2018. The rolling hills and dense woods provided a perfect backdrop for our daily explorations. But one particular walk in late October changed everything. That day, the weather was overcast with a slight chill in the air, typical for an English autumn. Max, a lively German shepherd, was particularly excited as we ventured into a part of the woods we hadn't explored before. The trees here were older, their branches gnarled and twisted, casting eerie shadows on the ground. As we walked, I noticed an unusual silence. No birds chirping, no rustle of wildlife, just the sound of our footsteps and Max's occasional sniffing. It was disconcerting, but I brushed it off as the natural quiet of a secluded forest. After about an hour, we came across a small, abandoned cottage, its windows boarded up, the garden overgrown. It seemed out of place, a relic forgotten by time. Max started growling, his hackles raised, staring intently at the cottage. I'd never seen him react like this before. Curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to take a closer look. As I approached, A cold shiver ran down my spine. The air felt denser, almost suffocating. Then I heard it, a faint whisper like a soft hiss coming from inside the cottage. I couldn't make out what it was saying, but it sent a wave of dread through me. I quickly decided to head back, but Max refused to move. He was fixated on the cottage, growling at something unseen. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw a shadow move behind one of the boarded-up windows. I froze, my heart racing. It was too large to be an animal, yet it moved with an unsettling fluidity. In a moment of panic, I grabbed Max and started to run. The woods seemed unfamiliar now. The paths twisted and turned in ways I didn't remember. The whispering grew louder, as if it was following us. I didn't dare look back, fearing what I might see. After what felt like hours, we finally emerged from the woods, the cottage and its eerie presence far behind us. I didn't stop running until we reached the safety of our home. Max was visibly shaken, constantly looking out the window, as if expecting something to appear. I have never gone back to that part of the woods, and I avoid walking near dusk. I don't know what we encountered that day, whether it was a trick of the mind or something more sinister. But the fear I felt was real, a fear of something unseen, something lurking in the shadows of the countryside. That story might have given you chills, but our next tale is about to turn the eerie atmosphere up a notch. It's a story of a family's move to the countryside that becomes a nightmare they never expected. Fourth story by Sarah Johnson. I'm Sarah Johnson, and my family's move to a quaint village in the French countryside in the spring of 2016 was supposed to be a dream come true. We left the bustling streets of Paris for a more serene life in a charming old farmhouse nestled among rolling hills and vineyards. Little did we know, our dream would soon turn into a waking nightmare. The house, a 19th century stone building, was beautiful with ivy climbing its walls and an old oak door. It had an air of history and mystery. Our first few days were spent unpacking and getting acquainted with our new surroundings. The villagers were friendly, but somewhat reserved, often giving our house sidelong glances and hurriedly changing the subject when we mentioned it. As we settled in, strange occurrences began to happen. Doors would slam shut in the middle of the night, and we'd often hear the sound of footsteps in the attic, despite it being empty. I initially dismissed these as quirks of an old house, but the events became increasingly unsettling. One night, as I was walking down the hallway, I saw a figure at the end of it, a woman in a long, flowing dress. She vanished as I blinked. Terrified, I convinced myself it was just my imagination. However, my daughter Emily, who was 7 at the time, started talking about a lady in the wall who sang to her at night. This sent chills down my spine. Determined to understand what was happening, I visited the local library to research the house's history. I discovered that during the late 1800s, the house belonged to a wealthy family. The family's matriarch, known for her beauty and haunting voice, had tragically died in the house under mysterious circumstances. Her death was a well-known local legend, and many believed her spirit still roamed the house. Armed with this knowledge, the strange occurrences took on a new, more sinister meaning. One evening, the piano in the living room began playing by itself, a melancholic tune that echoed through the house. the air turned cold and the feeling of being watched intensified. Things escalated when Emily fell ill with no apparent cause. She became withdrawn, and her nights were plagued with nightmares of the lady in the wall becoming angry. Desperate, I contacted a local priest to bless the house. During his visit, the atmosphere grew heavy, and a violent wind slammed all the windows shut, shattering one. After the blessing, the occurrences ceased for a while, and Emily's health improved, but the feeling of unease never left us. We sold the house a year later, unable to shake off the feeling of being intruders in a home that belonged to someone else, someone from beyond the grave. Our experience in the French countryside left us with more questions than answers. Was it the spirit of the matriarch haunting us? Why did it target Emily? We may never know, but one thing is certain. Not all countryside escapes lead to peace. Some lead to encounters with the unexplainable. Prepare yourself, because the next story takes the eerie factor to a whole new level. It's a tale of a countryside vacation that turns into a harrowing experience, one that will stay with you long after it's over. Fifth story by Alex Turner. I'm Alex Turner, and my encounter in the Australian countryside in the summer of 2020 was something straight out of a horror story. My wife Jenna and I had planned this vacation as a getaway from the hustle of Sydney, looking forward to the peace and quiet of a remote cottage in the Blue Mountains. The cottage, an old timber structure with a charming rustic appeal, was situated in a secluded valley surrounded by dense eucalyptus forests. Our first day was blissful. We explored the surrounding woods, enjoyed the local wildlife, and relished the isolation. However, as night fell, the once welcoming cottage felt different, colder, darker, and somehow more foreboding. That night, we were awoken by the sound of something scratching against the bedroom window. Thinking it was just a tree branch, I tried to dismiss it, but Jenna was visibly shaken. The next day, while hiking, we stumbled upon a dilapidated shack hidden deep within the woods. It was covered in strange, indecipherable symbols and felt eerily out of place. Inside, we found old, tattered clothes and what looked like animal bones. The air was thick with the smell of decay. We left immediately, feeling a sense of dread we couldn't shake off. Back at the cottage, the strange occurrences escalated. We would find our belongings moved or missing, hear whispers in the dead of night, and the scratching at the window became more persistent. One evening while Jenna was preparing dinner, she swore she saw a figure standing at the edge of the forest watching the cottage. But when I looked, there was nothing there. Determined to understand what was happening, I spoke to a local at the nearby town. He was hesitant at first, but eventually told me about the cottage's dark past. Decades ago, it belonged to a reclusive man rumored to be involved in unsavory practices and dark rituals. Locals avoided the area, believing it to be cursed. That night, the atmosphere in the cottage turned oppressive. We heard footsteps outside and muffled voices. The power went out, plunging us into darkness. Terrified, we huddled together, feeling an intense sense of being watched. Suddenly, the cottage door flew open, revealing the pitch-black night outside. We saw shadowy figures moving in the darkness, encircling the cottage. In a panic, we locked ourselves in the bedroom, listening as the sounds outside grew more chaotic. It felt like hours passed before everything fell silent. At dawn, We packed our bags and left without looking back. The cottage was bathed in an eerie morning light, its secrets hidden once again. We never found out what those figures were or what they wanted. But one thing is clear. Our search for a peaceful vacation in the countryside led us to a place with a sinister past, a place where the line between the natural and the supernatural seemed to blur. Those stories were quite the journey into the unknown, weren't they? I hope they've left you with a sense of thrill and wonder about what lies hidden in the quiet corners of the countryside. Thank you for joining me on this spine-tingling adventure of rural mysteries. Each story brought us closer to the eerie and unexplainable. If you enjoyed these tales, don't forget to check out the recommended video on your screen. It's one of my personal favorites and promises to take you even deeper into the realm of the unknown. Until next time, stay curious and remember, the world is full of mysteries waiting to be unraveled. Farewell and sweet dreams.